Welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over server-side pagination with list elements. All right, I'm currently in the app builder. I have a list in my app builder. It's currently connected to some random data that I picked up from the Random Data API service. I currently have 45 records. I copied and pasted my data in my app data to a field called user list. And then I binded my list element to this data set using the app data field. I just pointed my table to this data set. And as you can see, I am using pagination, but I am not using server-side pagination because this is static data. All right. So we are going to transform this data set to server-side pagination. And it's just going to be a series of very simple steps. And I'm going to show you multiple scenarios on how you can use this in a real life application. So let's just get started. So the first thing I'm going to do here is that I am going to get rid of this static data. I'm just going to Control A and just try and delete everything. All right. And I'm just going to set my user list to an empty array. I'm also going to have another field called user list total count. All right. And I'm going to set that to 0. All right. So we're going to use both of these things for our pagination. I'm just going to go ahead and save this and refresh the page. All right. So there you have it. Now we have a list with no data. And as you can see, there is nothing. All right. If I jump back into my app data, user list is empty. User list total count is 0. My list is still pointing to the user list. And as you can see, it's zeroed out. All right. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to switch this server-side pagination on. So with server-side pagination, you have quite a few tools. First of all, you have the metadata field. This is going to be used to track our pagination metadata. I'm just going to call this user table pagination metadata. All right. Just rename that really quickly. All right. And then we're going to map the total data row count to our total user list total count. All right. So I'm just going to go in here, switch the code real quick, and just say parameter dot app. Let me blow this up real quick. Parameter dot app underscore data dot user list total count. All right. So I've done quite a few things. So now let me explain what's going on. I have a list, right, that is binded to my user list field, which is currently an empty array. I just turned on server-side pagination. I've pretty much renamed my list pagination metadata field. This is a field in my app data that is going to keep track of the pagination states. If I were to look into my app data, as you can see, we have the user table pagination metadata. And right now we have a page. Page size is 5, which is the display limits. The limit is 5. The skip is 0, and the page index is 0. All right. So let's go ahead and just look at some other things here. All right. So server-side pagination on. My metadata field is already configured. I have now mapped to the total count. So what's going to happen here is that the system is going to use the total count and the display limits to determine how many pages should exist in the pagination, right? And this is going to be provided in whatever logic is querying for your data, all right? And here, if I go to the events, we have an event called list data fetch. This is basically the function that's going to be pulling our data from our data source. And I'm going to write the function really quick that we will consume using this event. All right. We have one more field that we're going to use, and it's called data fetch trigger value. So the way this works is that For you to, let's say, dynamically trigger a refresh of the table, all you will need to do is change the value of this attribute, right? Once if you change the value of the attributes, it's going to trigger a brand new fetch. And we're going to show you a couple scenarios that also includes this type of action. All right. So I'm still going to use my random data API. I'm just going to change this right here to 10. All right. So I'm still going to be using this API, this URL. I'm going to write a function really quick. I'm going to jump into my function builder. A new function, I'm going to name it get list user data. All right. You could write, your function could be, whatever, but this is just for demo purposes. All right. Demo server side pagination using lists. All right. I'm going to go ahead and create this. I just have one workflow. I'm going to call that workflow logic. I'm just going to add that workflow. And then here I'm going to add the workflow step. And all we're going to do here is this. We're just going to do a network request. All right. It's going to be a simple network request. I'm going to call this user data. All right. And it's going to be a get request. I'm just going to copy this URL. I'm just going to paste that here. Okay, so we do have pagination and all that stuff, but in this demo, we're not necessarily going to maybe get into all of that just because there's almost no use, but I will show you how it works. All right, so I have a simple get request here that's basically pulling data from our random user API. In my second step, I'm going to set that data to my application. So I'm going to use the updates client app data function. All right. I could use this with no code. I'm going to actually do it with no code. And I'm just going to I'm going to set two fields. So user list. In my app data, I'm going to set that to our user data variable. All right. Close this out. I'm going to add another object field. I'm going to point that to our total count, and I think we call it user list total count. All right. User list total count. And we're just going to hard code this at 50. It's going to be a number 50. All right. So that's it. We're going to go ahead and save this and deploy. So basically, here's what's happening. Whenever this function triggers, it basically just goes and gets 10 new records that are random, and we're just going to replace our existing records here. So now think about this from a perspective of if you were working with a database, you would basically go get the next set of records, right? And then you would set that to your data. If you are working with an external data source like we have here, you might want to pass in the metadata for the pagination and then use that in your actual request. But our random user API doesn't necessarily allow us to use pagination because it's always just giving us very random data. All right, so I've saved this get list user data, and I'm going to go back to my list, and I'm just going to connect this function. All right, so get list user data. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save that. So now if I refresh the page, or whenever this loads again, as you can see, it's pulled in the 10 records. So let's count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Actually, I can just look at the row indexes, and I can see that we have 10 rows. And we also have 10 pages, and that's because in our function, we basically set, right, the user list total count to 50, right? Okay, so let's just take a closer look at what we have here. All right, perfect. Let's go over here really quickly. All right. So we have a display limit of 5. Okay. So let's change that to 10. All right, so one thing you need to know about server-side pagination is that it's always going to display whatever you have in your data set, right? The system is no longer handling the pagination for you. So in this example, this is perfect. I had it here at 5, right? Well, our data set was 10 records. So it used 5 in the logic. So it said, hey, you have 5 items or a display limit of 5, and you have 50 items in total. So basically you should expect 10 pages. But the system is saying 5 and is using 50 and it's calculating 10, but we are returning 10 records. So in this case, it displayed all 10, right? So when it comes to server-side pagination, whatever you return is whatever is displayed. So if you want to only show 5 records, then you should only set 5 records, right? That's kind of how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and it's going to be more accurate. So I'm going to have my 10 records like I expect, but now it's only 5 pages because of we have 50, a total of 50 records. That's what we've told the system. If I were to look into my app data, I can see that I have my user list that has the 10 records, right? And I also have my user list total count, which is 50. And I also have the pagination, which is telling me, hey, look, you're on page index 1, you're skipping 0, there's a limit of 10, and the page size is 10, right? Now, if I were to, let's say, go to the next page, all right, so let's go to the next page. Now, so what's happened here is that because I went to the next page, it triggered the fetch event. If I were to just peek into my dev tools here at the network request, right, to go to the next page, as you can see, our random user API call was triggered. And if I go to the next page again, all right, you see it happened again. That random user API was called, right? And we've overwritten the data that we had in our user list, right? And right now we are on page 4. And if we picked back into our pagination metadata, you can see that we are on page index 4. We have a page size of 10, a limit of 10 because we are only returning 10 records. That's what we've told the system that we are returning. And we're skipping 30 because we're on page 4, right? And the page sizes are 10, all right? So that's pretty much how the system is helping you to manage the metadata of the pagination. And you can think of in your logic, in your functions, if you were like doing a database query, you would use that to add it to your logic, and you can skip, you could limit based on whatever, the system has provided, because the system is managing that. All right. So let's jump back into our list for one last hurrah. So as you can see, we've basically binded to the app data field. We basically said that we want server-side pagination. We have set a display limit, right? And we've set a total data row count. We've pointed that to an actual figure in our app data. We've written a function that basically pulls data from an external source using a network request. We are hard coding for now the total counts, but this could be a dynamic value based on a user's query in your application. We have looked into our app data and seen how the pagination metadata field changes as we interact with our pagination at the bottom over here. So we have all these basics covered. Let's just assume that we had a filter somewhere up here, right? And based on maybe a new entry in our filter, we wanted to refresh this table, or we wanted to make the table make a brand new fetch, right? Because remember that the list data fetch could be used in real applications. You might want to pass in the query from the application, right? If you had a set of filters, you would just pass that in, and you will use all that in your logic to do your database query or your query from an external source. But let's just say, assume that we have something like that. Let me go ahead and drag in a button. Okay. Where is the button? Okay. Where is the button? All right. Okay. Obviously having a hard time. Here it is, button. Perfect. I'm going to just drag it on top over here. All right, so we have a button. So we're just going to assume that whenever we click on this button, we want this table to refresh. All right. So if I were to go back into my list, there is a field here called data fetch trigger value. So whenever this changes, we're going to have the effect of our table refreshing. All right. So I'm going to just connect this to a field in our app data. I'm going to call this field table refresh trigger field. You might have multiple tables, so I'm just going to call this user table. All right, and I'm just going to have it as an empty string. Just going to copy that, paste that in my live app data. I'm just going to copy that here as well and go over here to my list. And I'm going to set that over here. I'm just going to expand this. App underscore data dot. Okay. And if you notice, if you look into our network request, whenever we do change that value, our table refreshes, right? So, you know what? I could just use the button to basically demo this out. I could basically connect a function that triggers whenever, but I don't even think I need to do that. I can just jump in here and just change the value. All right. So if I look in here, if I just change the value here, let's say I typed in A, B, whatever, as you can see, we trigger a refresh because this has changed. Another one. So whenever we change the value of this field, our table is going to refresh. That's the whole point, right? So let me actually go ahead and show you, maybe how I would do it if I were to use this function. I have a set states function that I wrote a while back called set state. Set state val. And all it does is take a parameter for the property or the field in our app data and the value, and it just updates the client's app data. So I'm going to connect that function to our button. All right. And I am going to, let's say, take that field. So this is going to be mapped to our property. All right. And then for the value, I'm just going to switch the code and just do a math.random. All right. So now whenever I click on this, our list is getting refreshed. So you can think of this button as maybe some kind of like search button. A user has done their filter and then they click on search. This could be done, it doesn't matter how you trigger this change. As long as the change is triggered, your table will refresh. All right. And it's always going to maintain the pagination. All right. So just keep that in mind. Awesome. So this has been server-side pagination using lists. This has been a fun video to make. See you in the next one.